Welcome to iLecture Online. So here's part 2 of how to derive the principle of least action. So where do we go from here? Well, now what we want to do is we want to graphically represent the path of least action, and it's this line right here. And notice now we have a function that's graphed x versus t. So x represents the path of least action. Now let's say that we have a slightly different path, which is this curved path right here. So we represent that by x of 1, which is the alternate path. Now, presumably, the path of least action means that the average difference between the kinetic energy and potential energy is indeed a minimum. So if we divert from that path, we then expect that difference to be slightly larger. And so when we then calculate the action, we'll end up with a larger number. We saw some examples of that earlier. So if we now represent a function to represent the difference between the two paths, and let's call that the delta of t function. So delta again is like a small x, so for example, a small difference between the two paths. Now notice that we want to go back to what we did on the previous video. Since we think that x is a function of t squared, it's a quadratic function. And so we can then say that x plus delta x therefore must be t plus delta t squared. If we square those two terms out, we get this. And then we notice that 2t is the slope of that function, because when we take the derivative of this with respect to t, we get 2t. So this represents the slope, and we could represent that by dx dt. And then we realize that when x is the path of least action, that means we're at a minimum. And at a minimum, that slope must be 0, so that term goes to 0 if indeed we're talking about the path of least action. So that my delta x simply becomes the delta t quantity squared, which essentially is 0 as well. So now when we calculate the action, it's simply the integral from t1 to t2 of the difference in the kinetic and potential energy times dt. And if we are in a gravitational field, the kinetic energy will be 1/2 mv squared, and the potential energy will simply be a function of x, of position. Remember, we're doing this in a one-dimensional direction. So then we realize that v can be expressed as dx dt. So therefore we have an x and we have a t, and here we have the potential energy as a function of time. Now, what if we take the alternate path? Let's call the alternate path x of 1. So when we calculate the action of the alternate path, instead of dx dt, we have dx dt plus d delta dt, a small change in the velocity caused by taking a different path. And, well, this should be potential energy right here. So potential energy minus, okay? So here we take the potential energy of x plus delta, so a slight deviation from the path, so we have to have an additional delta, an additional x, which we call a delta. So, coming up here, notice when we multiply this out, we end up with these three terms, the dx dt squared, 2 dx dt d delta dt, and d delta dt quantity squared. And of course, for potential energy, we end up with this. Now, we realize that this term right here can be assumed to be 0, because this d delta dt is a small amount to begin with, infinitesimally small, and if we square it, essentially that is equal to 0. So we can go ahead and eliminate the second order term, that's this d delta dt quantity squared. So we end up with this for the kinetic energy portion of the action integral of the alternate path, and then we still have minus the potential energy of x plus delta. Now we have to find a way to write this in a different fashion as well. So what we can do is realize that the delta x, that function that represents the difference between the minimum path, the path of least action, and an alternate path which is slightly different from the initial path, realizing that this must therefore be very small, we can then write the potential energy as an infinite sum of the potential energy plus delta times the first derivative of the potential energy plus delta squared over 2 times the potential energy, the second derivative potential energy, and so forth. Now you realize that those additional terms become really, really small, because we have delta squared, we're going to have delta cubed, and so forth. Since delta is very small, delta squared, delta cubed are so small, we can ignore them as well. So we end up with the second and higher order terms of that expression can be ignored, and we're simply going to keep the first two terms. The potential energy is a function of x, and the potential energy, the derivative of the potential energy times delta as the second term. Of course, we have to subtract both of those because we're subtracting the potential energy. So now we realize that if we look at this term right here, and we look at this term right here, those two terms belong to the original integral. And you can see that original integral there, that represents the path of least action, or not the path of least action, but the least action integral of that path of least action. And then the other two terms, this term and this term, really represent the additional terms gained in the integral by calculating the least action of the alternate path. So essentially what we can then say is that this becomes the path of least action plus the change to that integral, and we can then say that it's going to be equal to the original, so s is equal to this integral, and the delta s is going to equal this integral, those two additional terms. Now, if we chose truly the path of least action, then those two terms should go to zero, because that's what we mean by the path of least action. If they don't go to zero, we're not on the path of least action. If they do go to zero, we're on the path of least action. So this is going to determine whether or not we're on that path, and that's how we're going to define the principle of least action. And that's how we derive it. That's how it's done.